This conference will now be recorded.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Christina Newton, and I'm Director of Communications and Programs with the Virginia Association of Museums. And I am thrilled to have you all with us today. I'm going to turn things over to our program facilitator, Veronica Gallardo, who will introduce our guest today. And if you have any questions or comments, you'll find the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And also, if you would like to adjust your viewing preferences, you can do so at the top of your screen to change your view. And I'll keep a monitor on the sound. I'm going to mute everybody. If I'd ask you to please mute yourself during the program, but I'll also keep an eye on that and mute everyone during the presentation, just to be mindful of background noise for our speakers today. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Veronica.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Veronica Gallardo. I'm a VAM board member, and it's been a little over a year that I've been part of the board, and part of my task is to initiate DEAI chats in regards to what the field needs. And so, for the past Tuesday chats, we have delved in many different sorts of topics. And if you joined us last month, we delved into accessibility and access, which we forget that that's a really big part of DEAI work, that diversity and inclusion part. So we're really lucky today to have this brilliant young lady, Caroline Braden, that has so much experience. When I spoke with her and we talked about her work, I really felt that she can bring some really practical knowledge to the VAM members. And so, we wanted to make sure that you can have some takeaways. And last month we had Abby Diaz, which provided like this overview of accessibility and some of the work that she was doing, and some takeaways as well. So thanks again for joining DEAI, developing and implementing accessibility offerings. Caroline Braden is from the Henry Ford, and she'll be providing some insights on developing and implementing offerings and programs for individuals who are blind or have low vision, deaf, and hard of hearing. She'll share some examples of diverse sizes and types for you guys to take some of this information back to your organizations. So thank you. And Caroline, please begin.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks for having me today. So I will share my screen here. All right. So I will be talking today, as Veronica mentioned, about developing and implementing accessibility offerings, specifically through a lens of how we have done that at the Henry Ford over the past about 6 years now. And I'll also be starting off with talking about how I first developed a methodology for doing this type of work back when I was interning at a small archaeology museum in Michigan, and then I'll go into our work at the Henry Ford and share some different examples of offerings for a variety of different audiences. And I'm also going to be describing the visuals that I share today for enhanced accessibility. All right, so starting out, I first got into this field in about 2013. I was inspired by my grandmother who had dementia, and I was very close to her and would visit her quite frequently at her memory care assisted living facility. And it was during that time that I attended a conference session at the Association of Midwest Museums conference that was about programming for people living with dementia at museums across Wisconsin. And at the time, I did not know that that was a type of programming that was out there. But I was interested in working like in a museum, particularly like museum education, but I had never thought about that connection between museums and like healthcare or accessibility until then. I ended up doing an internship at the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology, which is in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in 2014. And the main project I did there was to create an accessibility plan for the Kelsey Museum. And the photo here on the left is of the front cover of that plan, and it's kind of hard to see in this photo, but there's about 100 pages here as a part of this plan. And the first part of that was based off of an accessibility assessment that had been done of the physical space there at the Kelsey, and looking at things like widths of doorways and heights of various features in the restrooms and signage and things like that. So the first part of this was to create a transition plan for making the various modifications that had been mentioned in that assessment. So who would be involved, what would the timeline be, what would the costs be, to make sure that those changes were carried out. And then I did research on a number of other things as a part of this plan, and I'll talk more in a bit about two major parts of this that were really influential then and have continued to be influential in the work I've done since then. But first, some other things I did, I researched like grant possibilities for accessibility projects. I researched like if people have like mobility limitations or using like a wheelchair or other mobility device, how would they best get to the museum? Like where were the accessible parking spaces nearby? Where were the bus stations and how far were those? And what was the best accessible route? And making sure that all of that information was on the accessibility webpage for that museum as well. But two parts of this plan that involved quite a bit of research and have continued to impact how I do my work. One was working with the community. So researching organizations serving people with disabilities, talking with them, seeing what could benefit those people at a place like this, and also researching the larger field of accessibility. So what were museums and other cultural institutions across the country doing for people with disabilities? What were the models that were out there? And then applying those to my own institution. And as a part of that, I also observed some programs. So this photo on the right is of a program for people living with dementia that's at the University of Michigan Museum of Art. And these types of programs actually got their start at the Museum of Modern Art in New York with the Meet Me at MoMA program. That's kind of the model that that started these, with looking at art, talking about art, making art. So really in that like art museum context. And I'll talk more later about how we've done that type of program at the Henry Ford. But observing programs like this and others have really been influential in the work that I've done at the Henry Ford. So moving on to the Henry Ford, I started working there on accessibility in 2015, and it started out as an internship, turned into a part-time job, turned into a full-time job a couple of years ago, and now actually we received a grant last fall from IMLS to enhance our programming for individuals with autism. So as a part of that, I now have two people working for me as well. So it has really grown in those years. Back before I was working there on accessibility, there really wasn't too much being done for accessibility. We had things like wheelchairs and motorized scooters. My boss had been starting to work with the Autism Alliance of Michigan on some autism training for staff, but there really wasn't like a focus on accessibility or like the time and the resources being devoted to that. though there was an interest in doing more of that. So to give you just a little overview of the Henry Ford, it's located in Dearborn, Michigan, so pretty close to Detroit. We have 4 different venues. We have an indoor museum, Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation, which has exhibits on everything from cars to airplanes to agricultural equipment. We have a new racing exhibit opening soon, which will be a new permanent exhibit. So this photo in the upper left shows some of our cars on display, and the new racing exhibit is going to be kind of an extension onto that exhibit. Then in the photo on the upper right here, we have some of our historic buildings from our outdoor historic village called Greenfield Village. We have about 80 historic buildings there in Greenfield Village. So this photo has just a few of them. Also, there's a Model T car driving by, which is a ride that our guests can go on. We also have a movie theater called the Giant Screen Experience. So there in the lower left is inside of that theater. And we have the Ford Rouge factory tour, which is a working factory in which Ford trucks are manufactured. And this is a photo here of the inside of the factory. So with all of these different venues that we have in our collections, there's really quite a bit that can be incorporated into accessibility programs and offerings. So starting out, one of the first things that we did, or that I did, was an assessment of our current offerings that we had. So things like wheelchairs and motorized scooters. It's shown there in the upper left. There's also some children's strollers there that we can rent. Also things like closed captioning. Where did we have that? Where did we need to add that? Like our restroom signs, where did we have accessible restrooms, and were they, did they have signs that labeled them as such? Also looking for offerings that our guests maybe did not know that we even had, and a lot of staff didn't even know we had things like this as well. One of these is the resting room, shown on the upper right. This is off of our front hallway of the museum, and it has like a hospital style bed, some chairs, a sink, air conditioning, and it's a room that's just a quiet, calming, private space for anyone who needs to calm down from sensory overstimulation, or needs space to pray or to nurse or anything like that. I also talked with staff from across the institution back when we were just starting out to hear what they knew we had for people with disabilities and the kinds of comments and concerns that had come up and ideas for future improvements. And that led to a list of like over 100 different ideas of things that we could do. So where do you begin with this list of 100 ideas? So what we did is we graphed, my boss and I, we graphed those ideas out into a chart from high to low guest impact and low to high time, cost, and resources. And we looked first at the things that would have the highest impact and the lowest time, cost, and resources. And a lot of those were like pre-visit or visit planning tools and resources that we could have on our website. So some of these are shown here at the bottom. One, for example, is a list of Greenfield Village buildings with limited accessibility, the number of steps into the buildings, if you can still see inside from the doorways, if there's a staff member who can come outside to provide more interpretation. We also created helpful tips and accessibility information pages for all of our special events. So here's an example on the lower right from our Halloween program. So tips about that program, and then accessibility information, like where were the drop-off areas? Where's the accessible parking? Where do we have wheelchairs and motorized scooters available if they're available for that event? And another part of that was making sure that all of the offerings that we have were listed on our website. So making sure that our accessibility webpage that we have is up to date, was up to date, and continues to be up to date. And that's something that I've heard many times from the community, is the importance of making sure that you have that pre-visit information listed and available, because it can really help to prepare for a visit. So moving on now to researching and developing new and expanded offerings, and back to that work I was talking about initially at the Kelsey Museum, working with the community and seeing what else is out there at other institutions. And there's some examples here on this slide of both of these. So this photo on the upper left is of a portion of our autism advisory group that we have. Our autism advisory group is comprised of parents and teachers of individuals with autism, and also a couple of people who have autism themselves. And this is a group that advises on our sensory-friendly programs and offerings, and also will sometimes walk through various exhibits that we have or events that we have prior to our having sensory-friendly events, and then providing feedback there. So here in this photo, we have a teacher of college-age students with autism. Behind her is a parent who has a young son with autism. And then next to me is an individual who has autism. And this is just a small portion of that group. But we're walking through our Halloween program, and they are giving some feedback in advance of our having a sensory-friendly Halloween event. And then here in the lower left, this is a photo of some individuals who are blind, who are touching a chassis or the underpart of a truck. And this is at the Ford Rouge factory tour. This was back in 2016. So it was when we were really kind of starting out in developing our tactile tours and tactile experiences. And I'll talk more about that a little later, but one thing that we did as a part of those and the development of those was to work with the community and to ask for ideas and to bring people in to test things out, and to make sure that this offering was really benefiting the intended audience. So this was a summer camp connected with the National Federation of the Blind of Michigan, and they came, we did a variety of things for them kind of as a test, and then they provided feedback in like a feedback session at the end. And then the two examples here on the right are some things I've seen around, but I've done a lot of traveling over the years to see accessibility offerings. Sometimes it's like a specific trip that I'll take to observe accessibility programs or offerings. Like I've gone to New York City the last, not last year, but the several years before that to see accessibility programs in action and to learn from those. But also just as if I'm traveling around and see things, I'll take pictures and oftentimes try to talk to people or follow up with people at these institutions afterwards to hear more about these things. So the photo here on the upper right is from the White House Visitor Center. When that space was being redone several years ago, there was really a focus on incorporating universal design and accessibility there in that space. So here, this is just one example of something they have on exhibit. They have some two-dimensional images, and then next to those, some three-dimensional raised versions of those images, which can benefit someone who's blind, has low vision, or anyone who can really benefit from touching something and feeling those details. And then the photo here on the lower right is from the Explora, which is a science museum in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is of a sensory room that they have. So I happened to be there for a conference and just happened to come across this room. It has like beanbag chairs. It has things of different textures. It has a calming lighting. It has this soft calming rug. So things like these two examples and other things I've seen around have been very influential in determining what we have and the different components of what we have. So what I'm going to do now is go audience by audience, sharing some different examples. Some of these are from the Henry Ford and others are from other institutions, things I've seen around. Hopefully will give you some ideas of things that are out there for these different audiences. So for people who are blind or have low vision, large print maps. These here in this photo are large print maps for the museum and the village, at least the front covers of those maps. We create our maps in-house, so we also create our large print maps in-house. The recommended font size for large print is 18 point, and Arial or another sans serif font with like a lot of contrast and dark colors on a light background. So that's what we do for our large print maps. Also similar to that, large print labels. And when I was at the Kelsey Museum, I was involved in creating some of their first large print labels. And with it being a very small, quite a small museum, I actually made those on my laptop, took labels from one of their exhibits, increased the font size and changed the type of the font, as I mentioned, and then sent that off to FedEx office, and they came back with this spiral bound large print label version that could then be placed at the entrance to the exhibit. Similar to these are actually at the National Portrait Gallery, but they're similar, large print, Braille. There's companies and organizations that can transcribe written text into Braille. And then also labels in other languages can be in these types of locations as well. Also raised maps and raised images. This example on the lower left is from the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York. And this is something called a verbal description and tactile guidebook. This is something made by a company called Touch Graphics, though there's other companies, organizations that can make things like this. And it has raised images of a number of their artifacts, Braille, large print, and a talking pen that you can rub along the images to get additional background and description. And then tactile models is another thing that can be incorporated like right into the exhibit, or something that can be available maybe in like a bag or a kit or a box. That's something that people can pick up and use. These tactile models in this photograph, at the bottom there, they are of a number of different race cars, and these are going to be on display in our new racing exhibit. And that's the first time that we will have tactile models like this on display. Another example of something similar is from Old Salem in North Carolina. For a number of their historic buildings there, they've created something called exploration boxes, and they have various items of that you can touch or that involve using other senses, and the staff there can use those boxes to help extend the interpretation of the buildings. So those boxes are for people who are blind, have low vision, people with developmental and learning disabilities, people with autism, even people who have limited mobility and maybe can't go up the steps into those buildings. So a lot of audiences can be served by something like that. So more about our tactile or touch tours that we have, which we're not offering right now during the pandemic, but I'll tell you about the virtual program that we have been offering. But our tactile tours, we've been offering, we started these in 2015. They were brought about by a request that we received from some people who are blind, who were going to be visiting, and they were wondering if we could provide them with a tactile tour. And it was something that some of our staff had given in the past, but not in a long time, but it was something that they were able to do for those two individuals, And then it's something that inspired our creation of a more like standardized tour that our staff could give in the museum. We trained our staff in how to give those. We had some people come in to help with the training, a teacher of students who are visually impaired, an individual who is blind herself helped with that. And then we were able to give these tours, which included opportunities to touch various artifacts. There's a photo here, somebody's touching one of our cars on display using gloves. And also we have small handheld models of artifacts as well that we've used during these tours. And like I said, we're not offering these right now, but we have been offering virtual verbal description programs or tours. This was something that I noticed other institutions starting to offer during the pandemic. So places like the Guggenheim and the Tenement Museum, they were doing these, and it seemed like something that we could do as well, where you have visuals on a screen. So whether that's a PowerPoint or somebody like walking through an exhibit and describing those visuals in great detail. So this photo here shows a historic photo of one of our buildings in Greenfield Village, Eagle Tavern, and our presenter there is describing this image and also providing some additional background and description and context there for that. So for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, closed captioning, assistive listening devices for like theater settings, American Sign Language should be available upon request. The photo there that I have, it's actually from a tour I observed at the Met, which was a tour given in sign language with voice interpretation. So the opposite of what you might normally think of, where there's like a tour given by somebody who's speaking and then they're interpreted by somebody who's signing. This was actually somebody leading the tour who was signing, and then next to her was somebody who was speaking what she was signing. And it was really an influential like tour for me to observe and gave me ideas of things we could do. And it was just kind of like a very inclusive and accessible experience as people kept joining all throughout this tour, because really anyone could be a part of it. It was for both the deaf community and with the voice interpretation there, anyone could just listen in and be a part of that. So I think it started out with like 20 people and had like 50 people by the end of it as we were moving through the space. Also ASL videos. This photo on the lower right is from the Whitney Museum of American Art, and this is their audio guide, and they have ASL as one of the languages on their audio guide. So there's like, you can do Spanish, French, or ASL, and you can watch these videos of people signing, and then there's also captioning available on these as well. Also, ASL tours or programs. We have had several deaf events over the years, and for some of these, when they're in the museum, we have ASL interpreters who are stationed with our museum presenters. But when these are in the village, the ASL interpreters will go around with the groups that are walking through the village, since the village is quite a bit larger of a space. We also, over the past couple of years, have been working with a local university that has a sign language studies program. And we had a deaf day where we had students from that program serve as interpreters alongside certified interpreters in the museum. And then we hopefully will be doing something similar for the village later this year or next year. But here on this slide, there's a map from one of our deaf days, and that showed the areas with the interpreters, and then and the bottom there, that's in one of our buildings in the village with an interpreter who is signing there to the group gathered around her. Also possible are virtual ASL tours and programs. We have not done these yet, and we plan to do some of these, at least having ASL interpreters there who are interpreting like a program that we already have planned. So there's that as a possibility where you have an interpreter present. Then there can also be programs that are specifically given in ASL and specifically for the deaf community. These are some photos from the Met where they have done programs, I believe, both ways. I'm not totally sure about that, but this is from their Met Signs tour with somebody signing there. For people on the autism spectrum, noise canceling headphones, earplugs, communication boards, we have all of these available in these boxes that we call sensory assistance kits. We also have backpacks with these things as well. Like for our sensory friendly events, which I'll talk about on the next slide, people can pick up a backpack and carry it during their visit and then return it. And it has the noise canceling headphones, the earplugs, and various like fidgets or tactile things. We haven't been using these during the pandemic, but we did have them before then. We are still using the headphones. We do still have those available and clean them off after each use. And the earplugs, we can still give those out as well. So these are available at our various ticket desks that we have around. We also mentioned them on our website, and we could have more signage about these so people know that we have them. But as you'll see on the next slide, when we have sensory friendly events, we put out like a table at the entrance with these and people can pick them up. Also, social narratives. So we have these on our accessibility webpage as downloads. And these have pictures and text to walk people through a visit and what to expect during their visit. And also if there's things that could be potential sensory triggers like loud sounds, bright lights, crowds, smells, anything like that, those are mentioned as well. Other pre-visit materials can include visual vocabularies, visual schedules. These photos here at the bottom are from the Intrepid. For their accessibility programs for individuals with autism, they send these out in advance. So the visual vocabulary shows different things that the group will be seeing during the program, and the visual schedule walks people through what to expect. So it has clocks showing when the program will begin, when it will end, and then it has an order. So first we'll do this, then we'll do this, last we'll do this. If you need a break, a snack, the restroom, here's how to do any of those things as well. So sensory friendly events are something we've been offering since 2016. And I know an increasing number of institutions have been offering such events over the years. And there's like models out there of different components to include, which tend to be like similar types of things across institutions. I did research on what other institutions were doing to help start out our sensory friendly events. So we have like sensory friendly maps that show areas with loud sounds and bright lights. We have quiet areas. There's a photo in the upper right of one of our quiet areas. There's like beanbag chairs. There's walls around it. There's seating. There's foam boards on the ground. We also have, depending on where these areas are set up, we'll have like calming lighting we can bring in. And when touching things was more possible, we had various like fidgets and tactile things as well. Also hands-on activities. So there's some photos here at the bottom, and the photo on the lower left is of a kid putting his hand into a bin of beans. So getting that like texture feel there as well. And this is from like 2016 or 2017, so a little bit ago. But also another thing for doing hands-on activities is having like visual directions that help walk people through the activity. So at the lower left corner in the photo on the right there at the bottom, there's some visual directions walking them through that craft. Also here in the center is our entrance table with the noise canceling headphones, earplugs, and where we have the sensory friendly maps. Another part of our sensory friendly events that we try to have is like an exclusive access time. So either an early opening or a sensory friendly time slot where it's only the families coming that have individuals with autism or sensory sensitivities in their families. Our sensory friendly Halloween event has become very popular over the last few years. And I think one of the main reasons for that is because we have like a sensory friendly time slot. So the families coming know that other families in attendance are experiencing many of the same things from their own children. We have the sensory friendly maps available, quiet zones available, and make several small modifications to the program. We don't really change the program a whole lot, but it's preparing people for what to expect. So we create like a social narrative to walk them through the program and send that out in advance. So providing the pre-visit materials and then like the quiet zones, and also staff training is another thing as well. So staff know what to expect. The grant that we received there's three main parts to it. One will be expanding the number of sensory friendly events from like 3 to 4 per year to 13 to 15 per year. Also developing a program for teens with autism, and expanding our staff training as well. So we're right now like developing an e-learning module that's for accessibility training and autism training as a part of that. So as a part of the pandemic and as a part of the grant, we've been doing more virtual sensory friendly programming. So these programs tend to have similar components. So a story, craft, movement activity, and music. And we also create and send a visual schedule walking people through what to expect. So here this slide has a screenshot there, and there's a visual schedule from one of our holiday virtual sensory friendly programs showing people what to expect. We sent that out in advance and then also walked through it at the beginning of the program. So the last audience I'll talk about is people living with dementia and their care partners. As I mentioned, with my grandmother having dementia, that was an audience that was close to my heart, and I was hoping we could develop something for this audience. It was the last program that we developed of the ones I've been talking about today, and part of that was figuring out like what this program would even look like at the Henry Ford, so at like a more history-focused institution than the more common art focused institutions, and also figuring out who would even give the programs. Since like our presenters who give the tactile tours, we're busy with a lot of other things and not necessarily wanting to start like a whole new program. So what really was the impetus for this is our local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association was starting a program called Community Connect, where they aim to connect people living with dementia with cultural institutions across Southeast Michigan. And they were interested in bringing some groups to visit the Henry Ford. And it was like, well, we better create something because they're coming. So initially it was like myself and our contact at the Alzheimer's Association putting together some plans for their visits. But it has since then, that was in 2017. So we've been doing it for almost 4 years now. And every month of the program, we have a different theme. And when we were on site with these programs and in person, the programs are about 2 hours long. Now that we're virtual, they're about 1 hour long. But with our themes, we try to connect with things that relate to people's lives and experiences and things, and try to have time for like conversation and engagement. So some examples of some of our themes here in the upper left, this is our curator of decorative arts. So we've worked with a lot of our curators on these programs. That's kind of been like the model that has worked over the last few years. So we've done a lot of that. Here, our curator of decorative arts is giving us a tour of our furniture exhibit. We've had programs focused on diners, the space race, our Hallmark ornament collection, our kitchens that are in the museum, a look at our car exhibit in the museum, a look behind the scenes of our conservation department. In Greenfield Village, here's a photo on the upper right of people doing some ragtime dancing. So we had like a music and dance program. We had one about gardens, baseball, horses. So a wide variety of topics for those. We also have collaborated with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra on these programs too, the last 3 years. This photo on the lower left is one of the violinists from the DSO, and he's playing one of the violins from Henry Ford's collection, which those are not played very often, so it was a very unique opportunity there. And then last year we did a program that was going to be in person but ended up being virtual in the summertime, which was connected with our Marvel superheroes exhibit that we had up at the time. And what we did is the DSO musicians, there was a string quartet, and they played superhero music from their homes. And then it was all joined together into these 3 songs that were played during the program. And we also had like a virtual walkthrough of the exhibit and a PowerPoint presentation about the history of comic books. So that went really well. This year we're doing a program, virtual program with the DSO that'll be connected with a Jim Henson exhibit that we're going to be getting this summer. So our virtual programs, this is a slide here, a photo here from one of these programs. This one's about wristwatches, the evolution of wristwatches. So like I said, we try to connect these with people's lives, things they're familiar with. So we've done them about like ice cream, chocolate chip cookies, the evolution of luggage design, our Hallmark ornament collection again, Valentine's Day. Next month is a behind the scenes look at our exhibits department. So those have been going pretty well. We actually have had more people attend the virtual programs than attended our programs in person. Like we had more total numbers in 2020 for these than in 2019. And I think part of that is because it's easier for people to join from their homes. But there also is kind of less engagement between couples and families. So when people were coming in person, they would come as like couples or with like a caregiver, and there was more like interaction between those groups. And now it's like, it seems a lot like the caregiver or the spouse will leave the person with dementia sitting there in front of the screen, and there's like less engagement as a group, but at least together we're able to like have an engaging program and still have these programs virtually. So just wrapping up here with some resources. I know Abigail mentioned this in January as well. Accessibility Consortia are groups that are just different geographical areas, can share best practices, have professional development opportunities. I chair the group here in Michigan, the Michigan Alliance for Cultural Accessibility, the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium, and the Museum Arts and Culture Access Consortium in New York. All of these are quite active, and they have websites with resources. Also, the Kennedy Center puts together the Leadership Exchange in Arts and Disability Conference, which is accessibility focused. Blog posts, webinars, conference sessions from organizations like AAM, AASLH, the Kennedy Center, and reaching out to local and national organizations serving people with disabilities. So like here I have the National Federation of the Blind, the Alzheimer's Association. I know both of those have chapters across the country. And then there's other more like local or statewide organizations as well. And here I've also put like the National Association of the Deaf, the Autism Society, but I know there's a lot of organizations. And what I have found in my experience is that people are very happy to help in any way and to answer questions, to give feedback on anything, and just happy to be asked as well. So here's my contact information. And I saw there were some questions that came in, so I'm happy to answer those or any others now. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. That's fantastic. We did have a couple questions. There was one question from Scott. He wondered, your ASL interpreters that you mentioned, are those like paid employees of your museum, or do you use contractors or trained volunteers? How might you advise, you know, an organization to kind of pursue that?
Yeah, so we work with an organization that's it's a Michigan-based organization called Deaf Community Advocacy Network, and they arrange for the interpreters, and we and then send us an invoice, and we pay as an institution. We put it into our budget, the money there for the interpreters. So and that's something that like the institution should be paying for rather than like the individual who requests the interpreter, if you do say that it is available upon request. So that is what we do. Right, like we've done surveys too if there's like staff who know ASL, and we really don't have like anyone. We have a couple of people who are in like sign language programs and are like students in those programs, so they've helped us with our deaf events, more so to like help move the groups around or help check people in, so things like that. But we do work with that other organization for the interpreters.
Oh, that's great. I know that we've here at VAM, we've worked with the J. Sargent Reynolds J. Sargent Reynolds Community College has a program, and where students, we've connected with students. State organizations, if anyone here is involved with the state organization, I believe have connections to ASL interpreters. But we do have those resources here. If anyone is interested in getting that information. So I can follow up with that in the follow-up email I'll send out. And talking about resources, there was another question, which was a great question. And I know at the end of your presentation, you provided some great suggestions. Do you happen to have any like you know, list of vendors? I did look up the Touch Graphics, which was great. Do you have any other vendors that you might, a vendor list that you might recommend that list companies or that develop materials and items for the accessibility disabled community, or list of services?
Not at the moment. That's a great suggestion, though. I could do more of that. Right now, institutionally, we've been working on researching organizations to create like raised maps, like the one I was showing from Touch Graphics. So we've been reaching out to them again, and we've also been reaching out to like 4 or 5 other organizations as well. And like, so I could, like, I'd be happy to put together more of that information of things that we've done. I don't have it right now, but on the on the resource page for the Michigan Alliance for Cultural Accessibility, and it's miculturalaccess.org, we have a list of resources there, not so much like vendors, but bunch of resources for different audiences and articles and things like that we've put together.
That's fantastic. That's great. I will definitely highlight that. That's a wonderful resource. And one thing is while we're talking about it, I put in the chat, VAM presented a workshop on I guess it was fall 2019 actually at the Chrysler Museum of Art, and I think we have some folks from our friends at the Chrysler here on serving the autism community, and I have some of those resources that I'd be happy to share with anyone from that program if you're interested. So I put my email in the chat box, but I'll also include it in the follow-up email. If there are any other questions, we have a few minutes. Please, unmute yourself, turn on your camera, and take advantage of Carolyn while we have her. Veronica, I didn't know if you had any other questions or for Carolyn while we're here.
Well, yeah, actually, I wonder on what, when a museum thinks about doing this type of work, and like, I'm just wondering when in your career or in a moment that you've realized or noticed that your organization was putting more attention towards this, and like how did that happen? Was there, I kind of feel that a lot of sites, and I'm coming from a historic site, so I'm just thinking about, we do like the minimal, or because we don't put it into our budget, we don't put it into our program, we don't, like we're just so focused on one part, or the visitor, and not being that inclusive. So I'm just curious when this, I know you work for like a large organization, but your experience maybe at a smaller organization, like I kind of feel that it's like one person that ends up like pushing for this, right? So I'm just, I'm just curious, because I know people here they want to do this work, but like what, how? And so besides doing, and I really like a lot of the ideas. I think that a lot of the ideas that you presented, an educator, and it's this will fall under the educator, and it really should fall more on that operational part, on how this needs to be part of your facilities, this needs to be part of your marketing, this needs to be part of your design strategy, this needs to be part of your collections management. And it just like falls under this small education department that's already run down and tired. So I'm just curious, what type of advice, or that you can give to us.
Yeah, and I'll also say that it definitely takes time. So like, I don't know, so I've been doing it for like 6 years, and it's still like, I actually, my position falls within our guest services department, and for that, it kind of has come about actually because my boss is really into this type of work, and like I said, started the autism training before I was even working there at the Henry Ford. So so that in that department, there's maybe a little bit more of like focus on like maps and people coming in and things like that, but still in terms of like marketing and things being incorporated into exhibits, it definitely has taken time. I think one helpful thing is like sharing examples from other institutions and being like, look at this place, they're doing this, and we should be doing this too. So I found that to be helpful. And also, like, what does the what is the community looking for, and who is not necessarily even coming to your institution? It's like an opportunity to draw in new audiences and reach new audiences that you may not already be reaching. So.
Right.
Well, I want to congratulate you with blazing the trail in this. I've been a member of Peninsula Museum Forum for over 20 years, and various museums have brought this up as a need, but they don't know where to go with it. I'll tell you one that does have some steam going with it would be the Waterman's Museum in Yorktown. I know they have tried to do various things, and part of that was working with the local school division, getting some of the special needs teachers involved, at least for the children with special needs. But coming from some of the other museums on the peninsula, the historic sites and all, it is not always a priority budget item. It certainly is not something marketing really looks at, except maybe one day a year. And it is frustrating for those of us who are thinking about this to move forward with it in our organizations sometimes, because we have to convince people that it's important. But it is important, down to the elevators, down to audio tapes, down to tactile, as you showed. I mean, there's always a need. And for example, if you're at a historic site where there's a loud cannon, that's going to freak out your autistic visitors. And the parents will be very upset if you're shooting a cannon around them without them knowing that that is coming, or having an opportunity for a better place to go during that activity. So there has to be sensitivity with planning, and it sounds like you've been accomplishing that. So I salute you very much, Caroline.
Thank you.
Definitely. Well, that sounds like a great way to end. I think we all definitely applaud the work that you have done, Carolyn, there at the Henry Ford, and for sharing your long research and efforts to get where you're at today. I'll just add on to what Winetta said, that in our program that we had at the Chrysler, one of the most touching moments of that workshop was, and we invited, I guess it was 5 parents of autistic children that were working with the Autism Society, but also with the museum. And so they brought in that group kind of as a focus group and assistance in guiding them in what could assist that those sites, reaching out to the families directly. So that was really just incredibly moving, wonderful part of that program. But I think we're wrapping up, getting close to 12. We just want to be mindful of everyone's schedule. Just thank you again. I want to thank Veronica and Richard Josie, our stalwart facilitators on our DEAI programming. We're going to take off next month, the month of March, as we focus on our annual conference. So we hope that everyone will join us online March 15th through 19th for this unique online experience that we're developing, which will include a number of presentations on DEI programming, including a wonderful presentation by Richard Josie and Veronica during that program. So I'll follow up with everybody soon with this recording, and look forward to seeing you again in April.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care, everybody.